Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with another archetype dedication with Pathfinder 2E. I know it's been a while. I've been trying to find myself as far as YouTube is concerned, and I think the channel is heading in a really good direction, but we cannot forget our roots. We cannot forget that I am the archetype man, and I'm doing the archetypes for Pathfinder. There's still plenty to go, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? And today we're actually going to be talking about the Eldritch Researcher, which is my favorite archetype dedication in Pathfinder 2E, or at least one of them. Anyway, I know I made like an archetype, but like it's one of my favorites that I absolutely love as far as what the aesthetic is and what it does. So let's go ahead and get into that, shall we? So the Eldritch Researcher dedication itself is very interesting. Now, you do need to be trained in at least occultism and arcana, which is very interesting, as there's not many archetypes with this kind of, I guess, polarity in it that requires you to have both skills, even though 2 skills is very common for archetype dedications in general. But what it gives you is you get access to 1 arcane or occult cantrip. And if you're not already trained in the spell DCs, you become trained in the spell DCs and spell attack rolls, and you use intelligence as your spell casting modifier, which is very unique, actually, because most of the time when an archetype dedication or most things give you access to spell casting when you're not already an innate spellcaster, you typically use charisma. So this is a really good option if you're playing like an investigator or some other kind of intelligence-based class that uses their intelligence to gain a little bit of extra spell casting. But not on top of that, you also get to pick between arcana and occultism, which becomes expert. And with that chosen skill, you also get a +1 circumstance. Yeah, circumstance bonus to checks to investigate or to identify magic of that type. So that's a very interesting one in general. I don't know exactly how much I like it being one or the other, because Arcana is just the objectively better choice, because Arcana has a lot more spells and a lot more magical things that can be identified with. So Arcana just seems like this standard choice, really, for this feat in general, and occultism is great, and I'm sure there are some campaigns where occultism might be a little bit more preferable, but I mean, arcana, if you're trying to investigate magical things anyway, is very important. This isn't even to recall knowledge, and that should be mentioned as well. This isn't to recall knowledge. This is for the process of investigating, of finding something out. So yeah, I don't know. Arcana should be probably your pick, but you can pick either one. But either way, not a bad archetype dedication. It's strange that it only gives you 1 cantrip bonus, but you do get a free skill increase and a circumstance bonus to all checks when using that skill for certain things. I think they should have gone with at least 2 or 1 of each, even would have been more interesting, but oh well. I still like it nonetheless. Seeker of Truth is our first feat from the archetype dedication itself, and it's a really good one because it gives you access to the initial domain feat or spell, focus spell, from one of the domains of knowledge, secrecy, or truth, which is very interesting indeed. And not only that, but the spell takes on the tradition of whichever skill you picked in the beginning, whether it's arcane or whether it's occultic. So very interesting indeed. I do love this one because these domains have really good spells in them. But not only that, but the spell description here the feat description specifically mentions that if it would provide, like, if the aesthetic is normally like a divine symbol, this one becomes some weird kind of eldritch or strange geometric shape, which I find very interesting. Doesn't do anything. Most of it doesn't do anything. The important thing about this feat in general is that you gain a focus point, right? Yes, you gain a focus point because you essentially get the Cleric's Domain Initiate feat. So this is actually a feat that gives you another feat, strangely enough, with just some caveats on top. But yeah, you get the domain initiate's feat, which gives you a focus point, and then you can refocus that point. So again, perfect for like an investigator or an alchemist, or even in like an inventor that wants to add a little bit of extra magic onto their kit. Really good, and I like these domains as well. Next up is Strange Script, which is a very interesting one. So essentially what it does is once per day, you can touch like some kind of text script or whatever. So it can be the examples they give here, like a book or a wall of hieroglyphs or a slab, that has written text on it. Anything, and you get like all of its context, and you can understand all of its context even if it is written in multiple languages. Now, you only understand the languages so far as it comes to understanding and reading the text that is in front of you, like in the tome or whatever. So you can't use this to read other languages elsewhere. It's just, you just get some inner truth from what you're trying to read / decipher. And speaking of decipher, if it is coded in some way, you don't instantly know what it means, but you do get a +2 circumstance bonus to trying to decipher it, at least for that hour, which is, I think, about as long as it takes to decipher. It might be longer based on what your GM might say, but that might even give you some clue further along if it's like a whole book you're reading. In any regard, this is a really interesting one. I kind of wish they made this one more of like a skill feat instead. I think that would bring a lot more value to this one. But if you're using the bonus archetype rule, which I recommend everyone does, because it's a really good rule set, this is probably a really good feat to pick up, because this is niche, but it comes in handy a lot in a lot of games. And a lot of the adventure paths, you're always coming across something that needs to be deciphered, or a text or a wall or something. So you can understand like everything that's being written down very easily. It's a really, really good one. Next up is a very interesting one. It's Scholarly Defense. And essentially what it does is your knowledge of the weird and the strange allows you to better defend yourself against aberrations and oozes. You gain a damage resistance to melee attacks made from these creatures up to 1/3 of your level. Now, this is a very interesting one. I don't know why it's 1/3 of your level. They should have just made it half your level, like some other archetypes have done, especially because it's so particular. Even though it's all damage types from melee from these two, which is pretty big, honestly, but it's very specific types of enemies. I guess if you're playing a campaign that's very orientated in one way versus like just being a general kind of campaign, it would be really strong. But even then, like, you're taking this archetype to, I don't know. So 1/3, I'm sure, is more balanced in the end, but I wish it was just a little bit higher, because I don't know. It feels like it would make the feat a little bit more worthwhile, but I do think this is a really good one, and I do like the aesthetic choice that comes with this one as well. As it, again, it's you're using your scholarly knowledge to defend yourself. So I really, really do like this feat in particular, and it's a really, really good feat. Next up is Able Ritualist, and it's a very simple feat. All it does is give you a +2 circumstance bonus to checks as the primary or secondary caster of ritual spells. That's it. Really easy, but this is the thing I love about this archetype in particular. It's an archetype that has very cultish vibes, or someone who looks into the Eldritch and the strange, and these kind of feats really make it come forth, because your character becomes adept at casting spells in very unique ways, like through rituals and such like that. I really love this archetype because it has cult vibes, it has cultist vibes. I love cult characters, like cultish characters. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's my personal aesthetic, so one of the reasons why I love this archetype dedication particularly. But as well, like, this is actually potentially really handy and really, really good. It might even allow you to get better effects, because a lot of the ritual spells get better if you like crit succeed the spell when you're casting it, which means that having a better chance of crit succeeding can get you better effects out of your rituals. You can have literally more potent rituals because of this feat specifically, which is really, really good. All right, we're about halfway through the archetype dedication. It's a little bit of a longer one, so I do apologize, but I do enjoy doing this for you guys, so you can at least get some bite-sized bits of information from these videos. And speaking of, if you're enjoying this video, you can at least leave a little bit of a like. And if you want to see more content like this, you can subscribe or follow me on Twitter if that's your preference. And we also have a Discord linked down in the description where you can join us over at the official Battle Gamer Discord, where we talk all things tabletop, including war games like Warhammer 40k. So if you want to join a bunch of people who are constantly making games in the Discord and talking in the Discord all the time, check us out down below. Sorry, I just need to plug myself. It does help, and honestly, I wouldn't do it if I didn't absolutely have to. Anyway, on with the video. Lore Finder is a very good feat, actually, because what it does is once per day, you can cast Locate as an innate, either arcane or occult spell, which Locate is really good. You know the direction of either a specific object or type of object. This can be used in a lot of ways. And while you can't really state any like specific always running kind of situations, trust me, having a Locate spell in your back pocket that you can always use is really, really good. And not only that, but when you get to level 14, it automatically heightens to the level or 5th level spell version, which allows you to pick a specific creature or a ancestry as long as you've met or seen any of them up close. So this can be really handy in a lot of situations, even into the late game. And what makes this one good is Locate is always one of the spells that you do want to have, but you don't necessarily want to prepare because it's very niche in its situation. So having the ability to pick it up as you need it and use it as you need it makes this feat particularly good. And especially if you know you're going to be looking for something in the future, you can always retrain one of this archetype's other feats into getting Lore Finder when you need it, which makes this an overall really good feat. Next up here is Know-It-All. This is another feat I wish was more of a skill feat, and I don't know. This one came from Hands of the Devil. What book series was that? This one came from Abomination Bolts, which is one of the earlier adventure paths, to be fair, so it's understandable. But I really wish they had added more skill feats to this archetype in general. I feel like it would have made it a lot better. Know-It-All is exactly one of those. In fact, there might be, well, there are other feat similar to this one. Essentially what it does, right, now let me tell you, is when you when you get a successful recall knowledge, you get an additional piece of information, and if you crit succeed, you at the GM's discretion, you get even more knowledge. So typically what happens is when you make a recall knowledge on like a creature, for instance, you learn one of its features, one of its most well-known features, and if you crit succeed, you get 2. Well, this week you could get 2, and then possibly 4 or 3 if you crit succeed, which is really, really good. And Know-It-All is just very solid to have. I just wish it was a skill feat instead, because while it's a really good feat, it's a very skill-based feat, and if you're not playing a class that gets a lot of skill bonuses, well, this can be a hard one to want to pick up. So overall, I think this one is really good, but I just wish it was a skill feat instead. Next up is Advancedseeker of Truths, and as similar with Seeker of Truths, this one just is the advanced domain spell from the earlier domain spell you picked up earlier in the archetype dedication. And something I didn't mention before, but if you pick up Seeker of Truth, you can actually select that feat multiple times. And similar with Advancedseeker of Truth, you can pick this one up multiple times so that you can get multiple domain spells, and now you can get multiple advanced domain spells. Just a good way to add more spellcasting to potentially a non-spellcaster, or just to add more spellcasting in general, especially if you're playing a class that doesn't get a lot of focus spells. For instance, this is actually potentially really good on a wizard, universalist wizard, because universalist wizard, I don't believe gets a focus spell right out the gate. They get to pick a feat instead. So if you want to have focus points that you have use for and you're a knowledge hungry wizard, this is a really good one to pick up because you can get some extra spells and uses of focus points that you normally wouldn't get. And a lot of these focus spells as well, is something I should mention, all these focus spells as well are really good outside of combat, which is really good because now you don't have to worry about trying to shoehorn in some extra focus spells into your combat routine, I guess, or rotation. There we go. Instead, you get some more feats that you can use outside of combat, which is really good. Boosting your character's exploration ability will enhance your character in general. So this is a really good way to go about it. All right, we're hitting the home stretch here, so let's get to it. Words of Unraveling is very interesting, and it has some interesting points. I'm actually going to pull it up here and talk about it more directly because there's some things I want to talk about. So essentially what the feat does is once per day, as an innate occult spell, you can cast Daydream's Curse, Outcast Curse, or Savant's Curse. Your pick. Every day you get one of these. Now, at the GM's discretion, you can pick other spells of 4th level or lower from the occult spell list. Now, you may have noticed something that's a little interesting about this one. It's occult, and with this feat particularly, if you picked Arcane for your initial cantrip that you could cast before, now you can get trained in occult spell attack rolls and spell DCs. But if you picked occult for your spell earlier, you become expert instead. This is an excellent way to become an actual expert spellcaster outside of, being a spellcaster. Though that does mean that really optimally, and let me double check something real quick. Yeah, so the initial archetype dedication says, regardless of whether you chose an arcane or occult cantrip, you then become an expert in your choice of arcana or occultism. So really, to get the most out of Eldritch Researcher, you should pick an occult cantrip and be trained or get expert in arcana for the purposes of the bonus. And then you'll become expert in occult by the time you get to this point. And you can even get some other spells that you can add to your spell list. It's very strange, and I don't know why they went about it this way, especially because there's just no arcane version here. I don't think. No, there's no arcane version here. So literally you're hurting yourself if you're making bad choices early on in your build. And though you could technically retrain the feat to maybe select something different later, that seems a little just arduous. I don't know why it was designed this way. It was designed for an adventure pass, so it wasn't necessarily like straight on the design team's normal crew. But still, this is just one of those weird kind of things. So if you're taking Eldritch Researcher, I do highly recommend that you pick Occult for your spellcasting, but you pick Arcana for the skill increase, because I think Arcana will become more helpful, but Occult spellcasting will be the better way because you'll get expert through Words of Unraveling. So just my recommendation. Either way, this is an amazing feat because it gives you expert in spellcasting when it comes to occult spells, and you get access to another spell that you can cast once per day, and it's a variable spell. It's a variable spell slot. You can think of this as a variable spell slot, which is huge because you can pick from any number of a list that, is given here or that the GM allows that you can cast once per day, which is really, really good. All right, next up is another interesting spell. Or not spell, but feat. It'll be a spell. Anyway, so entities from afar. I really love this feat, but it's a little jank, not gonna lie. So essentially what happens is with this feat, you can cast Summon Entity as an innate occult spell once per day. And similar to Words of Unraveling, if you were not an expert in occult spellcasting, well, now you are. So I guess technically you could still get an Arcana cantrip, and then by this point become expert spellcasting and occultism. I don't really see a reason to go through the extra steps to get everything out of it in that way, but you can do that, I guess. Though that does mean that you can't be an expert spellcaster in occult until level 14, which is very rough indeed, especially because by level 12, even partial casters are expert usually. So, whatever your choices may be. So this summon entity spell is unique though. So you get this once per day. And I love summoning spells, and I think summoning spells are really good. This might not be good for all classes, especially something like the Investigator, who has a little bit of a heavier requirement of their action economy. But still, it can be really good in a wide variety of ways. But you can instead utilize this spell as a read omen spell. Because you can ask, when you summon the aberration, you can, instead of using it as a minion, pose to it a question. And you have to sustain the spell for a minute, and you have to be able to understand the aberration. And then it gives you some cryptic clue as provided by the read omen spell, except this one is even more enigmatic and cryptic than normal. Then the creature disappears and doesn't give you any additional benefits. When you level up at 16th and every 2 levels after, the heightened spell heightens to a higher level, allowing you to a maximum of 8th level when you reach 20th level. So you can summon an 8th level creature, which is not very good in combat necessarily, but extra bodies on the battlefield is always good in my opinion personally. Regardless, I mean, this is a good feat just for the fact that you get a free summon spell every day. That can be immensely useful. But if you're going to go this far to get read omens, just get the read omens spell because it'll be less confusing that way. And really, like, on top of all that, I don't see it being that handy for the read omens aspect, especially because players don't pick up on like subtle cues unless you're like very much spelling it out for them. But this has some uses. Obviously, if you summon a particular kind of occult entity that might know about what you're currently interacting with or asking about, that might be even better. And it does have to answer you truthfully, just in a way that's very enigmatic and cryptic. So, yeah, I don't know. This is a very interesting one. I love this one for the aesthetic and because I love summoning, and getting an extra summoning spell sounds really cool. But as far as like overall effectiveness of this feat particularly, it's an okay feat. It's an okay feat overall, but I think that there could be better uses of your feats if you want something a little bit more like efficient and optimal. I like this one. I would select this one if I was doing it, but you know, it's an okay feat. All right, and last but not least, we get Incredible Recollection. It's an action that allows you to recall knowledge 5 times. Now, I think people really don't understand why these feats are so good because there's a variety of them. I believe Bard and even Investigator, I think, gets this kind of feat particularly. And it really boils down to this particular feat is really good for identifying as much about a creature as you possibly can at like the beginning of combat. For instance, if you use this at the beginning of combat, so typically what happens is when you recall knowledge something on a creature, you can attempt another recall knowledge to get even more information, though the DC keeps increasing until eventually it's plus 10, and then you can't learn any more information. So this allows you to squeeze out as much information as you can on a creature or several creatures, as the recall knowledges don't need to be all on the same subjects. This is a potentially amazing spell to set your team up at the beginning of a combat to really set yourself out. Now, one of the bad sides is if you have any kind of unique free actions or reactions based on recall knowledges, they cannot be triggered on Incredible Recollection. Regardless, this is a really good one, really great for your brainy characters. I like this one, and if you're using the bonus archetype feat and you're playing a class like the Investigator or the Bard, this is a good way to get essentially one of your feats without using one of your class feats, which I think is really good, and it's the perfect cap for this archetype dedication. I did say it was a longer one. I apologize if this video, bump my mic there, was a little longer than anyone would have liked, but I really like the Eldritch Researcher. It's one of my favorites, and 100% for sure, this is a really good one to make your character infinitely more interesting in your campaign. If you're using bonus archetype, consider your combat characters taking this, because this will give them a lot to do in exploration and will add a lot of narrative flair to their character as well. And it does provide a lot of very interesting bonuses, and you don't have to worry about it because a lot of it doesn't interact with combat necessarily. So you don't have to worry about trying to weave new things into your combat rotations. This is a really good exploration / narrative based archetype dedication, and it works so well for that purpose. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.